If you ever turn on a light or run a washing machine, I guess that's all of us, then you'll be affected by an energy bill currently under consideration on Beacon Hill. It would put a surcharge on utility bills to pay for natural gas pipelines. Massachusetts ratepayers could be on the hook for billions, you heard me right, billions of dollars.
Tide is rising,
This morning, as you see, hundreds of protesters stood out in the rain voicing their opposition to this plan before a hearing was held. The coalition fighting the plan is also running ads trying to build public support against it.
It's gas we don't need, a pipeline we don't want.
On the other side, supporters of the surcharge say something has to be done to meet our energy needs and that down the line, new gas infrastructure will reduce our bills. Confused yet? Governor Baker recently spoke about the state's energy crunch during an appearance on Boston Public Radio with Marjorie Egan and me.
I've said for a long time that Massachusetts and New England needs to chart its own course on a proactive basis around energy, and that as a region we're losing about 10,000 megawatts of power over the course of the next 5 or 6 years. Enough to power, by the way, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. Not exactly a small load, and we need to come up with solutions for that.
It's a complicated but obviously critical issue. Helping us to sort it out are Jim Rooney. Jim is president of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Good to see you, Jim. George Bacharach from the Environmental League of Massachusetts, George. And Tom Kiley, who's with the Northeast Gas Association and represents both National Grid and Eversource. Tom, it's good to see you. I don't think we're going to agree on much. So can we at least agree what the governor said about the need that's about to befall all of us? We all agree with that. Is that correct? Yes. So the only issue is how do you fill the need and how do you pay for it? So let me start with you. Your contention and that coalition's contention, we don't even need any more natural gas. Make your case.
Well, the Kinder Morgan pipeline pulled out because they couldn't find enough demand, enough contracts for what they're looking for. The question isn't whether it's natural gas or no natural gas. 60% of our energy needs come from natural gas. Now. But if this was your 401k portfolio and you had 60% of your investment in one fund, your advisor would tell you you're nuts. You ought to diversify your portfolio. We can do a substantial amount in terms of offshore wind, solar, and hydro.
Should any natural gas be part of what the governor calls his combo plan to fill that hole he talked about a minute ago?
We don't believe so. The Attorney General, who's the advocate for the ratepayer, did a substantial study through the analysis group that said no.
Secretary of Energy Matt Beaton says there's not enough to make this transition if we don't include gas. He doesn't know what he's talking about?
Yes, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Okay, speaking of the Attorney General, Tom, the Attorney General did say exactly what George Bacharach said a minute ago. Gas does not need to be part of the mix. Where is she wrong and why is she wrong?
Well, I was on that study committee, Jim, and in fact, if you read the report, it clearly indicates that there is a need for more natural gas pipelines to serve the needs of local gas distribution companies. When we talk about, in George's opening remarks, the Kinder Morgan pipeline project, which has been shelved by Kinder Morgan, and in fact, there are a lot of customers, potential customers out in the western part of the state that are very, very disappointed in that. They were looking for low-cost natural gas. So we are a growing industry, and for us to continue to grow, we need more pipeline capacity.
Do you want to break the tie, Jim Rooney?
Well, I don't know if I'll break the tie, but clearly diversification of supply is a big issue, and our gas supply can be argued to be inadequate in that, and cost matters here. During the winter months, there's been demonstrated that there are times when we don't have enough supply and the price spikes and companies and residents pay for that. So cost matters.
Well, let's talk about, go ahead, George.
Well, let's be clear here. If there's a capacity issue, it's roughly 40 days a year. That's what gets lost in this discussion. It's 40 days a year. Building pipelines is a $3 billion exercise, and there's no taking it back. The reality is the utilities have done a much better job in the last few years managing demand, which is why costs have been coming down the last couple of years, and we haven't built a pipeline.
So your view is conservation is part of the mix, which is also what the Attorney General is saying in her report, was she not?
We absolutely, and our companies are very efficient. In fact, the most dollars spent by any natural gas unit in the United States are those in the Northeast. About 36% of the efficiency dollars, over $600 million on an annual basis, are spent by natural gas companies in the Northeast United States.
You know, Jim Rooney, you mentioned it's about the money at the end of the day, and everybody wants their homes heated and they want the light on and all this. But the bottom line is they want to see what the deal is with the bill. You've seen the ads. I have one right here in the newspaper. I saw it on CNN last night. $3 billion, the pipeline tax. I don't think anybody disagrees, correct me if I'm wrong, that the cost would be $3 billion. The question is it going to be essentially saddled on the ratepayers, or are the ratepayers going to recoup this thing at the end of the day? I assume because there'll be fewer spikes in prices because the supply will be more reliable. Where do you fall in this thing? It's a lot of money.
Well, it is a lot of money. When you look at what we're paying already, 20% higher than the average across the
Massachusetts.
country. In the top 5 in all 3 categories, industrial, commercial, and residential. So when people are deciding on public policy issues, cost, reliability, and of course environmental, need to be balanced. They need to be balanced in a better way than they have been in the past.
So is your view, do you disagree with the position of the utilities that essentially, yeah, up front, if I mischaracterize this, I know you'll correct me, up front, yeah, there's going to be a $3 billion infrastructure expense, what is it, spread over what, 7 years, $400 million a year, whatever it is, on the ratepayer, but ultimately the ratepayer financially, forget the environmental effect for a minute, is going to benefit because the supply is more regular, it's adequate, and we're not going to have these spikes that cause prices to rise. Is he wrong about that?
I think so. I think the fossil fuel industry has amply demonstrated there are always spikes up and down, which there are not with renewable energy. The cost of wind and solar and hydro does not go up and down. But let's be clear here. This is a jobs issue as well.
What does that mean?
We spend $22 billion on energy in this state, and $18 billion of it goes out of state to support the Gulf Coast states and the folks that frack. And,
Isn't building a pipeline a good way to create jobs?
well, here's the way you create jobs. You create local jobs. If you build offshore wind turbines, you'll create tens of thousands of jobs in southeastern Mass. If you create onshore wind jobs, you'll create a stronger economy. Do we want to send those jobs out of state, or do we want to keep them here and create our own domestic energy?
What do you think the mix should be going forward? I know you think natural gas has to be part of this, but what is, if the governor, he uses the term nonstop, this combo plan, what should the mix be to fill this hole that he described at the top here?
Well, clearly, we absolutely should not have one source of energy. But that said, natural gas is very abundant. There's a gigantic field in Pennsylvania called the Marcellus Shale. That's only just a few hundred miles from here, Jim. Accessing that with more pipeline capacity. We're talking about, I've heard the number $3 billion thrown about for the cost of a new pipeline. Government officials use the number at the New England governors meetings and others that meetings that over the past 3 or 4 years, the consumer in New England has paid about $7 billion in aggregate on those mere 40 days
Why
when
should
the
the
prices
ratepayer
spike.
pay anything? Why shouldn't the shareholders of these companies, why should the ratepayers be paying anything here?
Well, here's the problem with the way the market works. There's no incentive for power generators to reserve pipeline capacity. So an interstate pipeline company isn't going to spend that kind of money unless they have customers lined up at the end of that pipe.
Can I, one of the things that troubles me about this debate, this is huge money. And you have all either been in politics or on the periphery of politics. Every time we talk about charging the customer more or the taxpayer more, there's a huge debate. I would bet 95% of the people don't even know this is existing. You say we don't need gas. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. You say it's going to be a $3 billion expense, it's going to be bad for jobs. You say it's good for jobs. How is the person sitting at home, when he or she wants to call their representative, starting with you quickly, George, who are they to believe? How do they decide where they fall on this thing?
Well, you could start with the advocate for the ratepayers, which is the Attorney General, who did an independent study and concluded we did not need additional natural gas capacity. But I think you have to also look at who the players are and follow the money. The utilities get their highest and best return by building infrastructure, pipelines. They get an 11% return. They're the only ones I know of really on Beacon Hill that are pushing for natural gas pipelines. I actually don't.
Deval Patrick supported building pipelines until he withdrew his support too.
Well, I think as more and more evidence came out over the years, it became increasingly clear, just as Kinder Morgan pulled out because there wasn't a need. But the point again is that the utilities are pushing for this because they make money. But it is the most illiquid investment. If Elon Musk comes up with a storage battery that allows us to store energy in 5 years, ratepayers will still have to pay for those pipelines for 30 years.
Quickly, why should we believe you, that person sitting at home? Why should they follow your lead on this thing, Tom?
Prices are low for natural gas. Consumers are lined up. We've converted from other fuels, Jim, in the past 4 or 5 years, tens of thousands of customers for the Northeast. We're providing a product that the consumer wants. It's very difficult for the consumer to be who is not on natural gas to be paying higher costs to heat their home in the winter versus those who are on natural gas 2 blocks away.
You get the final word, Jim Rooney.
It's a complex issue. The immediate action is to move forward with the hydro legislation and add
Which the governor wants.
greater hydro to the mix. Gas
While
is
this
gonna be
debate
while
continues.
this debate continues.
We'll continue it too. Jim, good to see you. George, as always, pleasure to meet you, Tom.
Jim, thank you
Thanks so
very
much for your time.